We reaffirm, cultural activities, goods, and services should not be treated as solely having commercial value. First, the debate framework. The negative has tried to shift the question of this debate. They'd like you to decide between economic and non-economic values for culture, and with this, has tried to shift the burden of the affirmative to something contradictory to the resolution. Instead, uphold the evaluation of the benefits of having values beyond and including commercial value, as opposed to having solely commercial value as the affirmative burden. I will be addressing the negative's arguments in the following order. First, international community. Then, global feminism, and finally, their attacks on the 1AC. Contention 1 was international community. Alan Baudier, Senior Research Fellow at the Transnational Economic Law Research Center, addresses assumptions made similarly by the negative team. First, they assume that adopting the advocacy will lead directly to isolations and anti-globalization movements. The necessary first step to an anti-globalization movement is actually protectionism spillover, which is something UNESCO's policies and objectives are nowhere near creating. Second, inefficiencies in cultural protection will only happen when protection policies are abused. To prevent this, the affirmative solves by significantly filtering nonsensical protection policies. Baudier states, a party may determine those special situations where cultural expression on its territories are at risk of extinction, under serious threat, or otherwise in need of urgent safeguarding. Given this wording, attempts to justify measures such as agricultural subsidies by reference to the UNESCO Convention would blatantly violate the spirit of the treaty and lack credibility. Contention 2 was global feminism. Nancy Fraser, professor of philosophy and politics at the Free University of Berlin and one of the foremost feminist philosophers of our times, warns against single variable feminist perspectives, such as those that assert that oppression can be eliminated by economics alone, which, much like the negative team. While most will agree that advancing women's economic status is valuable, viewing cultural labor as only economic has serious drawbacks, particularly for feminism. In fact, Fraser advocates the joining of economic and cultural politics. She writes, no serious social movement, least of all feminism, can ignore the evisceration of democracy and assault on social reproduction, now being waged by finance capital. A feminist theory worth its salt must revive the economic concerns without, however, neglecting cultural insights. With that in mind, benefits of global feminism is not exclusively achieved to purely economic values, but can also be upheld with our advocacy. Contention 3 is the 1AC. First, value. The negative's metaphor argument is simply quibbling. Let us reiterate a friendship analogy. Friendships have value. Some of those values do have economic implications, but when we were to view our friends only as having economic value, this would degrade the value of the friendship. Don't let the negative twist this idea. In fact, their conclusion that, quote, the best of differing cultural arts are worth more than their lesser counterparts, is the value the affirmative stands against, as it represents the externalities that are chosen by the majority population to survive within a purely commercial system. Second was crowd out. First, culture, as a negative reminds us, is difficult to define, but this inherent complexity is a warrant for an affirmative ballot because the value of culture extends beyond simple economic quantification. Culture, quote, conveys ideas, values, and meanings that can't be easily priced by a market. As Dr. Valentina, Fellow of Law at Maastricht University, explains, cultural goods are characterized by market failures because their value is mainly historical rather than economic. If the economic value of a building was less than the value of the land plus the value of what can be recovered from the demolished building, then by adopting pure economic efficiency criteria, demolition would be the best use of property. The same applies to shipwrecks. Even historically important shipwrecks have been completely dismantled to recover scrap metals. In cases of market failures, government intervention is not only necessary, but desirable to improve the market mechanism. This is a classic example of market failure, as well as a product of the destruction of cultural identities. Second, Salah Ben-Habib, Eugene Mayer Professor of Political Science and Philosophy at Yale University, explains that the claim that culture is socially constructed does not mean that it is not real. Sociological constructivism does not suggest that cultural differences are shallow or somehow unreal or fictional. Cultural differences run very deep and are very real. The imagined boundaries between them are not phantoms in deranged minds. Imagination can guide human action and behavior as well as any other cause of human action. To explain human behavior, the student should seek to understand the totality of circumstances of which culture is an aspect. This is obvious and will not need repeating, or constructivism not frequently misidentified with the view that anything goes and that symbols and representations can be shuffled like cards in a deck. Finally, the negative fails to realize that most, if not all, minority cultures are influenced by dominating majority cultures with multinational influence, such as the United States and other global powers. These majority cultures have the mentality of strictly commercial values, leaving many minority cultures crushed under the weight of strict commerce. We solve this, leaving to dust the idea that minority cultures have to compete in order to gain attention. Third is international trade. Their argument on WTO and other countries' perception being irrelevant to the debate is completely untrue. WTO, UNESCO, and the countries that hold all diversity as a culture are embodiments of the framers' intent for debate. The topic statement in Lafayette Debates Wiki clearly illustrates the framing of the resolution to be associated with the UNESCO Convention on the Protection and Promotion of the Diversity of Cultural Expressions. WTO policies will otherwise conflict with UNESCO's policies unless a decision is made on supersession. And 150 countries cast votes to determine the fate of the UNESCO Convention on Cultural Diversity. All of these perceptions are important to the debate and should be considered in decision, as all are a part of the story to determine whether or not we should treat cultural goods and services as having more than commercial value. In conclusion, voting for affirmative and supporting our advocacy of implementing UNESCO's policies and objectives is the best course of action as a judge, as the benefits embody the advantages of placing much more than commercial value on cultural activities, goods, and services. Thus, we urge a ballot for the affirmative. Thank you.